All right, well, we'll try this. I'm gonna bring my laptop. All right, so this thing right here, this data store, is basically a way for us not to have a database. It's a way for us to just store generic data. If you remember, everything in JSON, in JavaScript, and Python dictionaries, basically it's like a key and a value. So it's exactly like a dictionary in real life where you have a word and a definition. You can think of this whole thing the same way. So you have name, John, email, Joe Bartus at Rochester, blah, blah, blah. Coffee order, latte, you know, so you have a key, what the data is, what the type of data is, and then the value is what the actual data is. So what we did was we created this object that is a data store, and instead of letting the users access whatever data they want, use it however they want, we created these 4 methods, and that keeps it nice and clean, right? You don't want random users going into your data and changing it however they want, right? You want to force them to use your methods. So if you want to add new data, you have to use the add. If you want to get their coffee order or their email, you get with their key. Get all obviously gets everything, and then remove. So if you want to remove an email, remove an address, whatever, you can remove. So this is all that we have for generic data storing. Right? We could use this with anything. It doesn't have to be Coffee Run. It could be anything where we want to store data. So in Coffee Run, what we do is we have this object called a truck, and it holds a data store. Right? We didn't want to have to reinvent all of this inside our truck. We wanted to just have this generic way of storing data, and then add a few little things that are specific to our project. Yes?
So you make a data store and then you can use it in all of the other ones?
We could use it in anything where you store data, right? Okay. You could make an address book and store somebody's name, value, email, phone, blah, 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 blah. And instead of a truck, you would have an address book object. And then it would just have a data store inside it. So this is a really useful object to have because it works for pretty much anything. So again, we don't want our truck to actually be able to do anything with the data. We have very specific things we want our users to be able to do. Create a new order, deliver an order, or print all the orders. That's all that we can do. I don't know, I guess we might want to have a delete order if they like cancel order or something like that, but we don't. We just have create a new order, deliver an order where you send the customer ID, and then you can print all the orders. And all that these things do really is call these, right? When I create an order, I think if you remember the form, it has name, email, your coffee order, the strength, and any added shots. So there's 5 different keys and 5 different values. So when you create an order, this order has their name, their email, their blah, 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 and it puts it into the data store with these key value pairs. So again, data store is totally generic. It doesn't care what it's storing. Truck obviously is specific to what we are doing. So that's what we built in Unit 8. Couldn't really do anything with it. If you remember, we had to do everything in the console to like call these functions, to call these methods. We called them directly from the console to see what they did, and then make sure that they work. So Unit 9, you created this, or you are in the process of creating this, or what have you. So again, create order has what your order is, what your email is, which is your ID, what size, if there's a flavor shot, and a strength. But we don't really have a good way to connect these yet. Unit 9 was just about creating the form. So what we need to do is we need to have a way where when you click the submit button, it calls create order. So that is what Unit 10 is all about. And again, we're going to try and make it a little more generic. Right? We could have made a truck with all of these key value pairs in it, with a order, email, size, flavor, shot, and strength. We could have forced it to be that way, but it wouldn't have been generic, right? We couldn't use that for any other program. We could only use it for Coffee Run. So we created a data store which is generic, and we use that inside our truck.
Is there any benefit to that?
Yes, we can reuse this code in all of our other, we can literally use datastore.js in any other program we want.
Nice.
We never have to create that again. And so the same thing here. What we're gonna do is we're gonna add a click handler on the submit button. So usually the submit button sends it to the server, but what we want to have happen is we want to handle it ourselves. All the data that's in here, all of this stuff that they typed in, we want to go into this method right here in the create order. So just like in Autogram, where we stopped the ahref, the link, from the default behavior, and we made it change that big image. So when you click on a thumbnail, it changes an image. It doesn't go to another web page. We are going to do the same thing here. We're going to kind of add we are going to add a click handler onto this submit button, and it will call create order. But again, we want to be a little generic. We want to create a method that we can use on other forms. So we're not just going to hardwire create order into this submit button. What we're going to do is we're going to make this thing called a form handler, and we're going to send it create order. So it's going to be this generic method that says, I am a form handler. I am something that gathers this data and sends it to another function. I don't care what that function is. I don't care what the data is. I am very generic. I scoop up this data, and you send me a function, and then I will call that function with all the data. So it's kind of like a UPS guy. He doesn't really care where he's going. He doesn't care what's in the box. His function is to gather up all the boxes, right? And then put them somewhere. That's what our form handler does. He gathers up all the information and puts it in some other function. He doesn't care what function that is, or how it works, or anything. He's just like, you told me to do this, I'm doing it. And again, the nice thing about that is we can use it on any form for the rest of our lives. It'll gather up the data and send it somewhere else. That's what we want. That's what we want with almost all of our forms. So we have to write this form handler. We already have this, right? We have our form. When we click submit, the form handler is going to take this method as an argument. It's going to send all the data to the truck, and the truck's going to call add into the data store. So that's what we're going for. So Jquery is, the whole point of Jquery is to access parts of the HTML page. It makes it a lot easier than using the query by name stuff we were doing before. So what this does, you'll see this, well, first of all, we import it from CDN.js, just like we did with the CSS helper stuff. We import it once, and then we do this in all of our all of our JavaScript files, because that way we're not using different versions of it in every JavaScript file. We could import Jquery in every JavaScript file, but if we did that, like when you come back to it a week later, they might have implemented some new version of Jquery, and then you might import that instead of the one you did a week ago, and then you might have different versions in the same program, which would be really, really confusing and would cause bugs that you cannot find because they just might not be compatible. Anyway, so we import just one version of it in index, and then this tells us to get Jquery from our index.html. This is a special little variable, this $. This is Jquery. This is like what everybody now uses to represent Jquery. So we use it like this. Where's my example? So, oh, I didn't show you what selector was. I gotta show you what selector is. Okay. So, this is the way Jquery works. We're writing a function called form handler, which is this, right? We want to be able to do something when they click the button. And the selector here is the form itself. It's this, right? So we're passing in which part of the HTML file we want to look at. So if we didn't pass something in, then just say you didn't tell me what I'm supposed to look at. Otherwise, this is Jquery right here. His $sign says Jquery, and the selector is what you passed in. The selector is, in our case, I should have put this up on the screen. Selector is, where did I find it? There it is. Make it bigger. Yes, there we go. It's right here. See this form selector? It's exactly the same thing we did in Autogram, right? In Autogram, where's my form?
I think it was
At the top?
Yeah.
It's just,
Up below, yeah. Form data, line 15.
there we go. Right? Remember in Autogram when we had these in our HTML and we had to get them individually? It was like, I don't know, query by name, or I don't remember the exact one, but we had to find things in our HTML using JavaScript. We had to find the thumbnail, we had to find the detail image. Yes? Remember that?
Yeah, but
So we need to find the form, and the way we do it is by looking for this. So in main, we define our form selector as this: data, coffee, order, form. Data, coffee, order, form. So in Autogram, we had to search for that manually by name. But when you have Jquery, all you have to do is this: $sign and selector. And our selector is this. So you don't have to query the HTML to find it. Literally, all you do is say $sign and what you're looking for, and it comes back as an object. So it saves you a lot of typing and a lot of querying and a lot of getting stuff back or not getting stuff back, checking for results and errors and blah, blah, blah. All that happens in the background. It says $sign, find me this thing right here. This is what's getting passed in. Data, coffee, order equals form. And it will give you back this entire form because that's what matches. What it actually gives you back, of course, is a list of stuff. So say I had 10 different forms in there, or like in Autogram, if I had 10 different thumbnails, it'll give me back a list of all those thumbnails. So all I do is I say, if the length of my list is 0, that means I didn't get anything back. So I could not find my element. So Jquery, at the most basic level, what it does is it reads in all of your HTML, and then you can just select stuff in that HTML using the $sign variable. So it makes it really nice. It makes it, the communication between your JavaScript and your HTML, it makes it a lot easier. You can get stuff, you can set stuff. It's just a really useful tool. So, I should have left the coloring in instead of just pasting it. So this right here, add submit handler, is our add click event. So we want to have a form handler here, so this is how we're going to add it. We're going to submit, this is just a print statement, setting the submit handler. This form element is what we got right here, this form element. So this is, the form is the form you're filling out. So on click in Jquery is just on. So when they click submit, this is the function that called it. So basically the clicking submit. Again, we have to prevent the default. So just like in Autogram, when you clicked on the link, you don't want to go to another web page. You just want to change an image. We have to call prevent default. So don't do the default behavior when I click submit. Instead, again, $sign. So this is Jquery. For each item that I got back, get the data. So this is basically going through the form and getting the key and the value. So when you run this, you'll see how it works a little bit better. But basically what you're doing is you're getting this form, right here, we found the form based on our selector. We prevent the default from happening. We create a little data object and we start filling it from the form. For each item in the form, we say name and value. So email address, blah, blah, blah. Coffee, blah, blah, blah. Strength, blah, blah, blah. So it goes through the form one item at a time and puts all of it in this little data object that we created. Everybody's good so far? So the submit handler creates this anonymous function. So the on-click event stops the default from happening, gets all the data out of the form, and puts it in this little data object. So we're like 90% of the way there. We've gotten all the data out of our form, right? We've gotten it all out, but we still have not called create order. It's still not getting into our truck. It's not getting into our data store. And remember how I said we want it to be really generic? So we have to do something with this data. We want to call create order with all that data we just got out of our form. We went through and got all this data out of the form. So what we need to do is take a function and call that function with our data. So this is how we get all the data. What do we do with it? We have to take a function and call that function on the data. Remember I said we really want to be generic. I'm the UPS guy here. I got all my packages. I don't care what they are. It's just data to me. And I want to send all that data somewhere else. I don't care where it goes, as long as it gets sent. So you pass me in some function I don't care what it is, I'm gonna call that function with the data I collected. So this is another layer of abstraction. This is why I really want you to understand this, because it can be really confusing. This form handler gets all the data out of the form, and somebody else calls it with this function right here. Form handler doesn't care what this function is. You just pass it in and it calls it. So this is how we're finally gonna bind everything together. In our form handler, we're gonna add a submit handler, so that's this, add submit handler. This is what gets all the data and calls a function. And the function we're gonna call is create order. So add submit handler adds this guy to the submit button with this function attached to it. The UPS guy is attached to this form to gather all the data and then sends it with this function. And the reason, this is kind of a minor detail, but the reason that you have to say bind it to my truck is because otherwise it's gonna create a new truck every time. And we don't want a new truck for every order. We wanna always call create order, bind it to the same truck variable every single time. So it seems a little kludgy here. My truck is the truck object that we created in unit 8. Create order is the function we want to call, but we want to make sure that we bind it to one single truck. We don't want to make a new truck every time we get a new order. That's what bind means. How do we feel about this? Easy peasy lemon squeezy. I know some of the words that you said, or maybe I'll get it when I work through it now. That's kind of what I was going for. So I posted these slides, and I will post the video too. Hopefully it worked.